The time is 8:10. Within the next few hours, the European Commission will announce what could be the biggest tax penalty in European history, billions of euros in back taxes for Apple to pay to the Irish government. The Commission has believed for some time that the effective tax rate Apple enjoyed in Ireland was estimated to be as low as 4%, and that amounted to illegal state aid, well below Ireland's already low corporation tax rate of 12.5%. Apple has always said it received no selective treatment. The Irish government has said that the Commission misunderstands taxation in Ireland. We're joined in the studio by Dominic O'Connell, our business presenter. The allegation is that Apple essentially got a special deal out of the Irish government.
Exactly. It relates to two tax deals that Apple did with the Irish government, one in 1991 and one in 2007. And that enabled Apple to send all of the profits it made outside of America, or 90% of them, to Ireland, and then most of those then to an offshore tax haven where it paid no tax at all. The end result was that its effective tax rate was only 4%, some, depending upon how you calculate it. Some people think it's less than that. And Apple has built up over that time $180 billion just sitting offshore. It doesn't want to take it back to America because there it would have to pay 40% tax. The European Commission has been investigating whether this amounts to illegal state aid. They've concluded that it does, and we expect to hear at 11 a.m. What they want to do about it.
And are there bigger issues beyond the parties in this ruling? Washington is already upset at the way, in its eyes, Brussels has gone after some of its biggest companies.
There are huge dimensions, and this is one of the commercial disputes that's going to shape the world, really. It's all about who runs the world, big corporations or governments, because individual national governments have found themselves pretty much impotent against these giant multinationals. Our tax laws are based on the movements of physical goods, which leaves enough loopholes in the modern economy that companies like Apple can now pay pretty much as much tax as they like, wherever they like. And they're so large, Apple has a stock market value of about $600 billion, that individual countries like Ireland will do almost anything to get them to invest. They can't say no to that level of job creation and wealth. So it gives them a lot of political power. It's a harking back, really, might be stretching a point, to the era of the robber barons in America, where people like Rockefeller, Vanderbilt and Carnegie could do what they like, and eventually the American government had to get involved and break up their companies. And that's what the European Commission is trying to do, to exert control over a giant multinational where an individual government can't.
Dominic, thank you. Let's turn to Brian Lucy, who's Professor of Finance at Trinity College Dublin, and to Molly Scott-Cato, the MEP and Green Party spokesperson on tax affairs. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Professor Lucy, the Irish government is set to challenge this ruling. Does that mean it does not want this amount of tax paid to it?
Bizarre as though it may seem, on a day where we have been told that we have a record level of homelessness amongst children, the Irish government are going to say, no, we don't want your filthy money. The reason, of course, is that they feel that were they to accept the ruling that appears to be well briefed, that there is illegal state aid or a favourable individualised tax deal that would basically fly in the face of 20-25 years of denials. There's a political ramification to this that they simply don't want to face up to. They also feel that were that to be the case, then they might find themselves under increased pressure in Europe at a time when post-Brexit we're likely to need all friends we can get in Europe to allow us to cut any special deals regarding the UK's position with Ireland, etc. So they're in a bit of a bind. If it's a relatively small amount of money, which it doesn't seem to be, then they can probably get away with saying, well...
that line doesn't sound particularly helpful.
Real problem.
Professor Lucy, let me come back to you in just a moment, but Molly Scott-Cato, what do you think of the approach that the European Commission is taking?
Well, I agree with what Dominic O'Connell was saying. I mean, this is indeed a question about who runs the global economy, big companies or governments. And what Commissioner Vestager is saying is, well, it should be governments, and in order for governments to have the power to get the taxes they need from corporations and to control corporations generally, they have to cooperate. So she's encouraging European countries to cooperate so that together we can get the sort of tax revenues that we need. And if countries like Ireland are offering a special deal, or Luxembourg offering a special deal, or actually the UK has ways of doing it as well, in effect, we're all competing against each other and we're all losing. And what the European Commission is trying to do is to encourage tax cooperation within Europe so that we can stand up to US corporations.
But if that is the case, that we're all losing, perhaps that is because the tax framework is out of date and in an era where so much business is not bricks and mortar or physical goods.
That's right. So we have a good proposal to respond to that, which has two main parts. One part is that we have clear public reporting of where companies are doing their business, where they're employing people, and where they're actually making their money. That's public country-by-country reporting. And then we also have, I'm sorry for this piece of jargon, but it's called the Common Consolidated Corporate Tax Base. And what that means is you agree across Europe on the basis for which taxation should be, whether it's the number of people employed or the amount of turnover and so on. And then companies just pay their tax once and they share that money across the European countries depending on how much business they did in each one. That would simplify corporate tax systems, and they've actually in the past supported that kind of idea.
Yes, but where does that leave smaller economies like Ireland, for example, which are trying to essentially get an edge to encourage companies to come and base themselves in their territory?
Well, historically, it has been countries like Ireland and Luxembourg that have been operating like kind of internal tax havens within the European Union. But actually, the bigger countries are doing that as well. I mean, Britain operates these patent boxes, which are essentially a way of allowing companies to avoid tax and so encourage them to come here. And the US itself, I mean, you mentioned that Apple has booked its profits overseas, and that's because the US itself operates like a kind of tax haven. It has a very high tax rate, and it claims tax on profits made by its own companies, no matter where they are in the world. But it doesn't have any clarity. So there's aspects of a tax haven about the US itself. And while we're all doing this, we're all losing. And what we need to do is cooperate, get governments to cooperate against corporations so that we can make sure they pay their taxes and it's better for citizens. Because we're paying for their broadband networks and the road networks and all the facilities that they use, but we don't have the money to invest in them because they're not paying their taxes properly.
Professor Lucy, what Molly Scott Cato is advocating is cooperation between governments. But, I mean, what the Irish government has been trying to do is give itself a competitive edge.
Yeah, when you get into the arguments about the cooperation is great in theory, but each government will only do so if every other government does so at the same time. So there's an incentive for any one individual company or country to at least wait it out. The reality is that this is probably, I'm not sure if there may well be, but I'd be surprised if there was an individualized signed tax agreement somewhere in the vaults that said Apple will pay X amount of money or X percent. What we've seen is probably a result of decades of growth of a particular approach to taxation, to FDI, foreign direct investment, coming from the Irish government, which has resulted in being where we are. So the global tax cooperation is probably going to have to be something that is addressed. As Molly said, there is an issue with the US that they simply cannot sort out their domestic tax arrangements to bring this trapped offshore money back on shore. So, nobody's clean in this.
And as far as Irish public opinion stands, how do people feel about their government essentially saying, well, we don't want these taxes, we're going to challenge this ruling?
Can I answer that one?
Well, I think go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I think what we see the US doing here is deliberately trying to get the countries of Europe to compete with each other. So last week it was attacking Brussels, saying it was trying to operate like a supranational tax authority, sort of encouraging Euroscepticism so that we all start working against each other. And we really need to resist that because it works against all the people of Europe. And although tax cooperation is difficult, we can understand why an economy like Ireland might want to get this edge. Actually, in the end, we all lose. It's very important that we stand together and work for the benefit of all people of Europe and in fact all people in the world, and make sure taxes are paid properly and don't just give in to the power of US multinationals.
But once, Molly Scott Cato, once we are, sorry Professor Lucy, I'll come back to you in just a second, but once we are out of the EU and Brexit takes place, then we, if the EU gets the point where it sort of comes to some level of harmonisation on this, we will be outside it and we will then be trying to compete with it.
That's a very important point, and part of the reason it's been difficult to arrange tax cooperation across the EU is that actually Britain has always opposed that and voted against it. And now we're coming out of the European Union. Brexit itself will be used as an excuse for us to operate more like a tax haven. In fact, it may have been part of the incentive for some people for us to leave the EU. And it's really important that the European Union sticks together and it doesn't allow us special deals on tax. And, it makes sure that we also are part of the kind of good guys on tax. Because as soon as we voted for Brexit, we heard George Osborne come out and said, oh, well, will have to encourage businesses more by cutting corporation tax rates even further. And they've already come down from 30% to 20%, and he was suggesting coming down even further. But the way to be a successful economy is not to operate very low standards to attract multinationals and to get involved in this race to the bottom. It's to have strong politicians who stand up for citizens against corporations.
Professor Lucy, final thought from you?
I think two issues. One is that you asked a question about how the people of Ireland feel. It really hasn't been a big issue because it's been bubbling along in the background as a technical business tax, in the business pages. It hasn't been the front page news. If, as I say, they find themselves turning down billions of euro of tax revenue potentially, I think that'll become a big issue. Don't forget we have a minority government propped up by lots of independents, so it's got the potential for destabilisation. Molly was making the point about tax competition and investment. I mean, she's right. The difficulty is that when you get into a situation where everybody's competing, there is a race to the bottom, and you end up with zero corporation tax rates. The reality is that corporates do well when there's a strong set of infrastructure, both physical and governmental, around them. That's well known. You can't have that unless all sides of the economy, basically capital and labour, are paying their piece. And it's better to have a strong, healthy economy where everybody pays a little bit, rather than having vast sums of money sloshing from one side to the other. The City of London is the largest pump for tax evasion and avoidance on the planet.
Yes.
This is accepted and known. There's no way whatsoever that a UK outside the rule of Brussels is going to get any better. And in some paradoxical way, the loss of large parts, if it happens, of the financial sector from the UK to Frankfurt, Brussels, Warsaw, we see today in the Financial Times, may well actually help global tax competition.
Professor Brian Lucy and Molly Scott, Cato MEP, thank you both.
The time, 21 minutes past 8.